Yo, what's up, guys? First link in the description box is going to take you to Joe Rogan crashing the MMA hour with Ariel Helwani. And he basically asked Ariel Helwani, why did you get fired from Fox? And he goes, I don't really know why. I got fired from Fox because Ariel Helwani might be controversial when he talks about his questions. He's the best MMA analyst out there. Like I said, first thing in the description box, Joe Rogan says he would leave the UFC if they sold the product to another person. And his contract is up in August. So, if you see Joe Rogan not re-signing his contract and then leaving and just doing his podcast and whatnot, would this be a downfall for the MMA community? Because Joe Rogan is probably the best announcer out there. He knows his shit. He knows his stuff. But when you get somebody that is out there and they'll go, well, you know what? I'm not returning this time. I'm not redoing my contract. I'm moving along. I'm going to do other stuff outside of the MMA world. He wouldn't be watching every MMA fight. You know, he would still be watching fights, but not as, like, as a commentator. There's a difference between commentating a fight and just watching it with your boys. So, what do you guys think of this situation? Joe Rogan does say that he will leave the UFC if they sell the company. So, is it good for business for the UFC to sell themselves to another company, like another investor that might make the product better? Or the reason why I think Joe Rogan's announcing is better for MMA and for the casual fan over like Kenny Florian or Brian Stan. I'm not saying Brian Stan or Kenny Florian are bad announcers, but they break it down that sometimes that the casual fan can't understand. When you talk to Joe Rogan, he breaks it down like, this is why this guy did this is why that guy did that, and so on and so forth. But it's like when you listen to MKBHD, he right here, look at this camera. He can tell you every reason why you want to buy it. And Casey Neistat can basically do the same thing, like break it down where the average casual fan will go, damn, I need that camera. Because when you start hearing about it has 24 megapixels, a CMOS sensor, a backlit display, a lot of people get confused. But the way those two dudes break down technology is the way I see Ariel Helwani and Joe Rogan breaking down fights. They break down fights and break down the commentating like nobody. They make it like entertaining. You know, you can hear Joe Rogan's passion for the MMA when he gets fired up when he's watching some guy throw a leg kick. Oh, like you can hear him because he's always saying like Rampage Jackson's be throwing leg kicks. You can't be one-sided. Oh my God, ooh, you hear him, oh, and he gets excited. You can hear it in his voice. That's why when I watch fights, it's compelling because I love watching fights. Been watching fights since like 96, and I have never stopped watching fights ever since. But for Ariel Helwani to ask that question, would you leave the UFC if they sold the company? He said, yeah, I would. Because would this make Joe Rogan go from the UFC go from here to the bottom? Would a new investor that buys the UFC kill the brand, and then you'd have Bellator and other MMA promotions rise up? I don't know, man. It's just a weird situation to think about because Joe Rogan has been the voice of the MMA community for the last like 8 years. And when you tune into the MMA fights like the UFC, you're expecting to hear Joe Rogan. But when you hear other people, you're like, it's not that enjoyable because sometimes they don't know what's going on. Sometimes it's good to have an actual ex-fighter be a commentator like Kenny Florian. You have Dan Hardy, which does pretty phenomenal. You could have somebody like Frank Mir step in because Frank Mir is a really good commentator. But this is the way Joe Rogan does it. He does it where a casual fan can sit back on their couch, have a beer, and enjoy the fights and understand what's going on. A lot of these guys, they put out words that are too technical, and it freaks people out. They're like, I don't even know what's going on. But I'll say this. Joe Rogan should do a podcast with Ariel Helwani. I think they're the two best guys in the business when it comes to MMA. I think Ariel Helwani and Joe Rogan get very fired up when they talk about fights. You can hear it in their voice. They're passionate about it. But that's why I bring you this podcast, guys, because I love what I do and I love shooting this shit with you guys and I love talking MMA. But would you watch the UFC if Joe Rogan left? And why do you really think Ariel Helwani got fired? Click the links in the description box and it'll take you to the full podcast where you can hear what happened.